I utterly condemn the far-right thuggery we've seen this weekend. I guarantee you will regret taking part in this disorder.
हर घर से हिज़्बुल्लाह निकलेगा, हिज़्बुल्लाह जिंदाबाद.
Lindsay was 15 when she was abused by Arshid, Ash Hussein. Arshid's brother Banaras, Bono Hussein, raped Natalie when she was just 13. Both were given lengthy jail sentences.
What happened that first time that you met him?
He was just trying to get on top of me. He was trying to pull my trousers down on the settee in front of everybody.
Alexander Hamilton said, "A nation which can prefer disgrace to danger is prepared for a master and deserves one." Now let's set the record straight. There's no argument over the choice between peace and war, but there's only one guaranteed way you can have peace, and you can have it in the next second: surrender. Admittedly, there's a risk in any course we follow other than this, but every lesson of history tells us that the greater risk lies in appeasement.
Hello everyone, welcome to the channel, and I hope you guys are doing great. Today we'll be talking about democracy. Because we live under a democracy, we should understand what it means, and most importantly, the consequences of living under a democracy. How does it affect us as a people on a day-to-day basis? So we're going to talk about its definition, and we're going to talk about its consequences. But the most important thing is, the reason for making this video is to learn something from you as well. This is a two-way conversation where I'm going to share my thoughts, and at the same time I'm expecting that you will correct me on my misconceptions as well. So let's talk about its definition. What do I understand by democracy? When you say that you stand for democracy, then obviously you stand for equality. This is my understanding, that everyone has to be treated equally. Okay, under the democracy, a commoner and a king are held equal. There is no king. I'm talking about, let's say, prime minister or president, like the high officials. So under the democratic rule, everyone will be judged equally, everyone will be treated equally. Okay, if you uphold equality, you uphold democracy. In other words, if you uphold democracy, you uphold equality. And then of course there is secularism. Like, these things actually go hand in hand. Separation of the church and state. Free speech, everyone is treated equally, and as such everyone will have an equal representation. You will have a voice that will have as much weight just as everyone else. Okay, so these are some of the assumptions of democracy. You'll be provided with some of the basic necessities such as the safety and security, like the police, judiciary, law enforcement, and all those things. You can raise your concerns, your grievances, and of course you will be immune against threat in case your life is jeopardized. When you raise your concern, you raise your grievances, and if a lot of people agree, accept those grievances, then there can be a law to protect you against those unfortunate situations. So under democracy, threats or violence or harm is prohibited. One of the basic necessities of life, because you want to live in a safe and secure environment. And also at the same time, you are insured against some of the misfortunes of life. Let's say, for instance, you get disabled, you get into a car accident, or something happens to you, and as a result you lose your employment. In that case, the state is going to provide you with some assistance so that you do not die out on the street. You are not left to die under the scorching sun. So these are some of the benefits of democracy. You will have an equal representation. You will be provided with some basic necessities. You'll be immune. You'll be protected against some of the unfortunate events of life. You'll be provided with some welfare assistance, not everything. And you can, of course, raise your grievances, your concerns, and people, like the lawmakers, are bound to give you a voice, to give you a chance to speak. So free speech, secularism, and of course, equality, the notion of equality. So these are some of the ideal situations of democracy. Now, it may sound quite good, like if you look at the things as they are in an ideal situation, it may sound that everyone should be adopting these principles. But idealism is not always the case. Like when we are dealing in a real life situation, these idealistic principles may not always be held. Okay, so what are the drawbacks of this democracy? Now, let's say for instance, you have a grievance, right? Free speech. But the problem is, we also have peer pressure. You are raising your concern against someone else. You have a grievance against some other individual or some other entity. Now, when you raise your concern, how do you feel about it? Because at the same time, you're offending someone. Okay, by raising your concern, by raising your grievance against someone, you are offending someone. What if that someone is very powerful? Rape victims, for instance. And of course, there is a shame, element of shame. When you are raising this concern, let's say that you are one of the victims of rape survivors. How comfortable would you be to come to the public and, talk about your experience? It's not a very pleasant experience, to put it mildly, right? These things are not uncommon. In fact, these things are very, very common, and there is an issue, and that issue is being discussed openly. That's one situation. But what if the information is withheld from you by the state? Censorship. We are introduced to the notion of political correctness because when you offend someone, when you express your grievance or your concerns, you are likely to offend someone. So to reduce conflict in the society, the state sometimes imposes political correctness. If the notion that you are raising your concern against, what if that notion is accepted by a large number of population within the country, by a sizable chunk of the population within the same country? A lot of people, when they raise these concerns, they are subjected to even death. They raise these concerns at their own peril, at their own risk. So although in an ideal situation, in an ideal democratic society, you have the voice or you are immune against the threat, however, it is not always the case. So although we are signing up for free speech, freedom of expression, we are also ensured, protected against the threat. However, in the real life, as you can imagine, there are some challenges, right? So what does it mean? It means, again, the stifling of the voice. It means that your voice is being silenced. You signed up for democracy as a model for free speech, but in return, you are getting political correctness, which is going to stifle your voice. So we talked about peer pressure. And of course, we talked about political correctness. Okay, not to offend other people so that they feel comfortable, they feel inclusive into the society. However, there is yet another issue that comes along in a democratic society. Deep state. We are getting all too familiar with this term nowadays. Like there was an ad a couple of days ago that was put forth by the campaigners of Donald Trump. Donald Trump is running for election, so the election campaigners, they put forth an ad where Kamala Harris, the current VP of the United States, was called a puppet. Very famous and kind of funny ad as well.
I may not know the first thing about running the country, but remember, that's a good thing if you're a deep state puppet. I had 4 years under the tutelage of the ultimate deep state puppet, a wonderful mentor, Joe Biden. Joe taught me rule number 1, carefully hide your total incompetence. I take insignificant things and I discuss them as if they're significant. And I believe that exploring the significance of the insignificant is in itself significant.
Now, the message of this ad is very simple, that you are being governed by some bureaucratic elites, by an elite class that is beyond the public view. You cannot see them, they are not in the public view, but they are the one running the show. They are the one drawing the string. So this is actually a very troubling news. Like, what if your government wants to wage war in a different country, military-industrial complex, right? arms is a huge business around the world, and these things, when people make money out of the arms sale, they make huge profits. So how do you stop them from making these profits, as it is completely out of your control? When the majority gets the vote, however way they persuade you as a people, but once they get to the power, most of the things are now beyond your control. Although democracy is of the people, by the people, and for the people, but once they get to the power, how much is of the people and how much is for the people?
The unfinished work which they who fought here have thus far so nobly advanced. It is rather for us to be here dedicated to the great task remaining before us, that from these honored dead we take increased devotion to that cause for which they gave the last full measure of devotion. That we here highly resolve that these dead shall not have died in vain, and that this nation under God shall have a new birth of freedom, and that government of the people, by the people, for the people, shall not perish from the earth.
How much is of the people, right? How much is for the people? By the people, they are elected, they persuaded you, you voted, and now what they are doing, they are stabbing you at the back. They are selling your future to the people that you have no business with. So the question obviously is, how fair is a democratic society, right? There is yet another issue. Like, we're going to discuss multiple issues. The other issue that comes along is bigotry. Like, democracy is the will of the people. What the majority people deem as important will then be prescribed as the law of the land. What if these majority people are bigoted? What if these majority people have a tunnel vision? If you have like one individual, let's say for instance, a bowl of cherry, how many cockroaches do you need to completely wreck the appeal for that bowl of cherry? Just one. You drop a cockroach and that bowl of cherry is now gone. Like, no one wants to have it anymore. What if there is one individual who is intelligent and the rest of them are cockroaches in the same bowl? You know, to progress in a society, what do you need? You need ideas. You need clever ideas. You need intellectual people. What if that society is governed by bigots? Most of the people in that society, they look through a particular lens because they have been indoctrinated to do so. Let's say, for instance, just to give you an example, Afghanistan. What was the outcome of spending, let's say, like the destruction of life, the waging of the wars and all those things, putting those things aside, but United States have invested some couple of $1 trillion in a span of about 20 odd years, right? Before they withdrew back in 2020, I believe. So when they withdrew, up until that time from 2001 up until 2020, so that's about 20 years. So within that 20 years, within the time frame, they invested some couple of $1 trillion. What was the outcome of that investment? First of all, again, of the people, by the people, and for the people. When these people took to the power, I'm talking about like the Bush administration and whatnot, they obviously persuaded the people, but once they got the people's mandate, guess what they did? Without consulting the people, they went into waging wars, of which you and I had no control. Like, I'm not a citizen of the United States, but the citizen of the United States had absolutely no control of what these people are going to do with that mandate. They went into waging wars in the Middle East and in Afghanistan and whatnot. And along the way, they wasted hundreds of millions, billions, trillions of dollars. And again, without any accountability. Without any accountability. So what is the lesson in case of Afghanistan? After investing these billions of dollars, why have they failed to establish democracy? You give them the power that, okay, look, you vote, you go into democracy, you exercise your will. How did they exercise their will? They chose another bigot. Let's say Hamas, 2005 for instance, Gaza. Same story, like when these people are given a democratic right to exercise, they exercise their democratic right, but then again, they put a terrorist into the power. Because obviously, there are a lot of bigoted people into the society. They look at the world with the same tunnel vision, just like everyone else. So when a society is ruled, is full of bigoted people, does democracy really work? In those cases, you are giving them the right, but what they gonna do with that right? They're gonna kill off those freedom. Okay, you are giving them a voice that, okay, you exercise your voice. They exercise their voice and put a terrorist into the power, and that terrorist will come and destroy all those powers. So does democracy work in those cases? Let's say, for instance, the death of Hezbollah chief, Nasrallah, right? He died a couple of days back. There was a targeted strike. And then what we are seeing right now is that there are protests all over the world. Some of the most largest protests are taking place in the Western world. Okay, there is even a protest being organized on the 7th of October. Think about it this way, that people are exercising their free will. What is their free will? To glorify terrorism. It is their free will. Under democratic society, you are given a voice, and that voice has equal weight just as everyone else. And now because you have the voice and equal weight, now they are glorifying terrorism, and the Western world got nothing but being a spectator to this situation, right? You have seen marches after marches after marches after marches. You have seen people chanting some of the most egregious things on the street, not in Afghanistan, not in Lebanon, but in the streets of, let's say, Sydney, like in Australia or in the US or in Canada or in Germany. Because under democracy, they have a voice, and that voice has equal weight. They are exercising their voices. So my question is, does democracy really work? You are protected, you are immune against some of the threats, but when somebody is exercising their free will, glorifying terrorism, right? In Kashmir, for instance, there are thousands of people on the street. If you are a Jew, right, or if you are a Hindu, or if you are a Christian, how do you feel in those cases? You are exercising your free will, but does this exercising of the free will make other people feel comfortable? I don't think so. A lot of people are feeling threatened by these massive demonstrations all over the world. A lot of people, they are feeling very, very threatened. They are feeling that their personal liberty is being taken off, is being challenged. And then, of course, there are some very absurd people. Queers for Palestine, for instance. Like, how on earth can you support a terrorist organization who wants to annihilate you from the face of the earth, right? Now, because they live under a democracy, they have their own voice. And guess what they do? Guess what they're doing with their voice? They are supporting a terrorist. Given half a chance, they're gonna throw you off the top of a rooftop. Okay, so sometimes this freedom, although it sounds good, although it feels that you are doing it for a right cause, but at the same time, you are also putting not only yourself at risk, but also you are weakening the moral of the entire nation. Think about the left-wing politics, for instance. Like, what exactly was the necessity? Let's say, for instance, Angela Merkel, 2015. She made a very stupid decision, and mostly she made this decision single-handedly. What was the exact reason behind? But now, once she made the decision, people are facing its consequences and will face its consequences for a very long time. So although it may sound good, it may feel good at the moment, but these feel-good moments have very lasting consequences in our society. They are putting everyone at risk. They are putting the lives of ordinary people at peril, at stakes. Is this necessary? Like the whole left-wing politics. Appeasement, the politics of appeasement. When something happens, when people show their solidarity with the terrorists or they do something outrageous, some politicians always side with them because they want to appease them. They don't want to, rattle the closet door at the expense of everyday citizen. Because if you are a VIP, if you are a politician, you have some level of immunity that we as the commoners don't. You will probably have a police protection, you probably have armed bodyguards surrounding you. You have some protection, you have some privilege that is not provided to us, the common civilians. So once they side with those people, guess what happens? It undermines the morale of the entire nation. You feel alienated because you are not being represented. Your voice is being silenced. So again, democracy, although the promise was that you'll be given a voice, but guess what you are getting in return? You are being silenced. You are feeling alienated. Instead of feeling inclusive into the society, instead of feeling that, okay, I am part of the society, my voice is being represented. Now you are feeling that you are being betrayed. You are being deprived of your rights. The policy of the vote bank, the policy of appeasement, the minority appeasement policy. So what are we getting out of this democracy? Are we getting safety? Are we getting free speech? Are we getting good education? Let's say, for instance, the notion of transgenderism. Sometimes these ideas have been pushed into the curriculum. People who don't want to learn these things, they are also being forced to learn these things. You are entitled to your own view, that's fine, but you shouldn't be forced into my view, right? But when you decide a curriculum, some of the left-wing politicians, when they decided a particular curriculum, when they're prescribing a particular curriculum, they're putting those things into that curriculum in a way that now this has to be forced into everyone's mind. These ideas are being forced into everyone's mind. Every children are being indoctrinated, brainwashed to some degree into learning something that are not entirely good for the society.
A family can be made up in many different ways.
It's called SOGI, for Sexual Orientation and Gender Identification, a curriculum that teaches public school students across Canada to celebrate the homosexual lifestyle and that gender is fluid. In other words, your gender is not dependent on what parts you were born with, but rather what you feel like in the moment.
There's people that are boys, there's people that are girls, there are people whose gender might be a little bit of both, or might even be neither.
Lessons include books about transgender children, such as 10,000 Dresses, and songs like the Rainbow Song.
Gender won't decide the choices we make. Some boys like dressing up, some girls like catching snakes.
The SOGI curriculum started in British Columbia in 2016 and is quickly spreading throughout Canada.
I just thought, who decided that this was okay to teach our children?
Okay, so what are we exactly getting out of democracy? What are we exactly getting out of secularism? It is a good ideal situation, in theory at least, of the people, by the people, for the people. You have a voice, you can raise your concern, and your voice will be heard. That's the promise. But now your voice you are feeling threatened because your voice is being taken off. You are giving room to ideas that you do not subscribe to, that you do not accept. You are making room for those ideas, and at the same time, now because you are being forced to accept some of the ideas, you are now feeling that you are alienated from the society. Like, what exactly is that democracy is achieving as a people, as a society? So we talked about deep state, we talked about political correctness, we talked about the shared bigotry. Like most of the Muslim world, when you look at those countries, why there are so many minority oppression? They look at the world with the same tunnel vision. With the same tunnel vision, that calls for annihilation of the minorities. Like, it promotes exclusivity rather than inclusivity, and that's exactly what you see in case of the Islamic world. Most of the countries, if not all of them, like if you exclude one or two countries, let's say Turkey or Dubai, if you put aside those one or two examples, most of the countries, they have an extremely high birth rate. They have like lack of some of the very basic necessities of life, like free speech, tolerance for the minorities, and so on. So these things are being repeated because they look at the world, they're indoctrinated from their childhood to look at the world in a certain way. Okay? And then when the same people come over here, in the Western world, there is a conflict between the groups, between like one community and the rest of the communities. So I think democracy has failed in many ways. It has its cracks, and as we are moving forward, we are now seeing it is getting much more obvious what those cracks are, what are the fault lines of this democracy. Let's say, for instance, the idea of multiculturalism. The idea was that everyone will get along once they come in contact with all those different cultures. But what we achieved instead, that we are now much more fractured than we were ever before, even 5 years, 10 years ago. Because when you feel like your voice is being silenced, when you feel like you are not being represented in the community, then of course there are some, frustrations that bubble up. And I think those frustrations have bubbled up to a very certain extent nowadays, because some people have been provided too many privileges, and at the same time, you are feeling that your privilege is being taken off. You feel like there is a disparity between the way you are treated. You are being treated differently than a certain percentage of the community. So I think it is very clear at this point that although democracy promises a lot of things, but it definitely fails to deliver at least some, if not all of it. Especially when people are chanting, they are holding like the hate symbol, so to speak. They are holding the placard of a terrorist. You look at Kashmir, you look at Sydney, Australia. When you see that there are thousands of people on the street, when you see that they are holding placards, not only that you feel threatened, but also at the same time, you cannot help wonder if there are sleeper cells. There are people that are next door who are sympathizers of those terrorists. What happened on October the 7th, it was an act of terrorism where a nation was held off guard. They had no idea that these kind of things can actually happen. But now that this has happened, now that we are seeing people are holding placards, they are going into demonstrations in thousands, are you sure that there is no major incidents being planned on the streets of Sydney, on the streets of Melbourne, on the streets of New York? How confident are you that those things that happened thousands of miles away is not going to happen in your neighborhood? Are you certain, like absolutely certain, that no way that this can happen? When in reality you are seeing that people are chanting slogans, they are going on a protest, they are displaying, they are praising and displaying those terrorists who are wanted, who have the blood of the innocent people. These are not good people, they have the blood of the innocent people. How do you feel about they being praised, they being honored, they are being mourned, in your neighborhood, do you feel like your rights being promoted, or do you feel like your rights being cut off, being taken off? How do you feel about this whole situation? Now let's put everything together. You are working your ass off, you still can't make a living, you still can't get a roof over your head. And these people out and about every single weekend on the street protesting thousands of miles away from the Middle East. Of course, they have their family. Who is supporting them? Billions of dollars, I'm talking about billions of dollars of your hard-earned taxpayers' money without your knowledge or consent have been dumped into the tunnels of Gaza. Why it didn't work? It didn't work because of the flawed ideal of democracy. Democracy is an idealistic situation. It does not take account of human psyche. People are different, they look differently. You and I are different fundamentally. You look differently, very differently than I do. So billions of dollars have been dumped into the tunnels of Gaza. People are out and about every single week chanting, protesting. In case of democracy, what is their fault? Other than the fact that they are also exercising their free will. Is it their fault really? If somebody is going on a march, holding those placards, praising, displaying the terrorists, is it the fault of the democracy? Have you not signed up to give them the freedom to display those things, to chant those slogans? Have you not signed up to give those freedoms to them as well? So if you have provided those freedoms to them, then how democracy have promoted your cause? Your streets are getting more and more violent. You cannot get out on the street without being worried about your own safety. All the prices are going up, whether it's rentals, whether it's fuel price, whether it's commodities, all the daily necessities, they are going up. Can you not get angry at any of these things? When you see all of these things, can you not get angry at any of these things? Thousands of people have been granted visa. Thousands of people, completely unvetted, without checking anything about their background, who they are, what they have done. No vetting has been done. Thousands of people have been granted visa to come from a war-torn country, from Gaza into Australia. What was the necessity? Was there any dire necessity that those visas has to be granted? Look, my intention is not to, there are situations people are facing, not to discount them entirely. They are not disposable. That's not the point. But the point is, you put your hard work, and at the end of the day, you are being shortchanged. You feel like you have been betrayed. You have been taken advantage of. Your goodwill have been taken advantage of. And that is the fundamental flaw of democracy. Democracy to me is like a horse race. Who can get to the power? You make some fake promises, boom, you get to the power, and now you can enjoy all the good life, and the rest of the people, they are now disposable. At the expense of someone else, these democracy have been weaponized. At the expense of someone else, at the expense of your goodwill, you have been made a sacrificial lamb because of democracy. So I think the fault lines of democracy is now being exposed. I think it is failed. It is going to fail. We were told that multiculturalism will succeed, but to some degree, when there are exclusive cultures, when there are hostile cultures that want supremacy over all the other cultures, then it is an example how democracy is going to fail. I think what the Indian philosophers figured out some 10,000 years ago, like the notion of karma. What is the notion of karma? The notion of karma suggests that you are the builder of your own destiny. You are responsible for your current situation, not anyone else. You are going to build your own destiny. The most basic law of nature. cause and effect. You do something, and of course, you will be held accountable for those actions. I think that notion has been completely taken out, completely brought down. Guess what happens when you take out this notion? When you take out this notion, you are relieving people of the responsibilities that they also have to contribute to the society. Like democracy is a way to take responsibility off people's shoulder. Okay? And I think this is something that we should be careful about when we are talking about democracy. In a democratic society, democracy implies that everyone is equal. It is a way of cultural appropriation. You are saying that everyone is equal, but in reality, this is not the case. Everyone makes different choices. The choice that I am making is different than the choice that everyone else is making. I am making a video and you are listening to the video, for instance. So everyone has a free will, everyone has a choice to make, and those choices have consequences. But in a democratic society, it is not really imposed. These choices are not really passed on to the everyday citizen. Some of these choices, in fact, many of these choices are being withdrawn, are being relieved from the shoulders of the citizens. They are held equal. But if I make a choice that is different than everyone else, then why should I be held equal? The choices that everyone else has made is different. However, we are all being held equal. So I think this is something that a lot of people, especially if you are a staunch supporter of democracy, you have a very difficulty to deal with these kind of situations. People's emotion. People have self-destructive tendencies. We all have something good and something bad. What is civilization? Civilization is to suppress these negative tendencies and to promote, to uphold the positive tendencies. That's what civilization is. That's what makes us different, because we can reason. Unlike the animals, we can reason. Out of those reasoning, we can choose whether this is good or that is bad. We can promote our positive faculties, and at the same time, we can push down, we can suppress our negative faculties. But in a democratic society, this is not the case. It does not question your motive. Let's say, for instance, the so-called opposition, they want to get to the power. They are making promises so that the people vote for that particular group, right? But once they get to the power, why they abandon most of the policies? These are the policies they put forth. These are the policies they promise to deliver. But why do they withdraw themselves from delivering those promises? That is where I think the intent comes along. When you have an evil intent, they are trying to get to the power regardless of the means. It doesn't care which means they apply. Their objective is to get to the power, and then once they get to the power, they can do whatever they like. I think democracy is very vulnerable in these cases. Very, very vulnerable. And especially the deep state, like there is a concerted, like an effort to silence people so that some of the information is not provided to the general public. They are kept hidden. Right now we live in the age of the internet. But when you look around the world, lots of things happen. People are being, they are being silenced constantly by the judiciary, by the police, by the authorities. They are being hunted down door to door for making a comment on Facebook, for liking something or showing their solidarity to a particular group, a particular cause. So I think one of the crucial elements of this entire discourse that the Indian philosophers figured out some 10,000 years ago, that unselfishness. In Bhagavad Gita, Krishna says, how do we perform our duties? A lotus which is born at the bottom of the lake comes out of the water and reaches to the sun. The same way, man has to perform their duty as an offering to the deity. Then he will be relieved of the sins of that action. Unselfishness is not touched by the lotus that is born at the bottom of the lake, is not touched by that water. The same way, man has to perform their duties as an offering to the deity, and that way he will not be touched by the sins of his action. I think without these notions being implemented, that how people's intent, when you are performing something, what is your intent? Is that a selfish or an unselfish intent? Without the notion of karma, without the notion of cause and effect, it is easy to say that we stand for free speech, we stand for equality and all those things, but how do you implement those things? How do you materialize those things becomes extremely vague. Let's say, for instance, Donald Trump, he participated in a debate just a couple of days ago, and he accused Kamala Harris, the VP of that debate, the current VP of United States, that why haven't you done anything?
So she just started by saying she's going to do this, she's going to do that, she's going to do all these wonderful things. Why hasn't she done it? She's been there for 3.5 years. They've had 3.5 years to fix the border. They've had 3.5 years to create jobs and all the things we talked about. Why hasn't she done it? She should leave right now, go down to that beautiful White House, go to the Capitol, get everyone together and do the things you want to do, but you haven't done it and you won't do it.
I think the whole idea of intent becomes very, very clear in that statement. Why haven't you? You're saying that you're going to do those things once you get elected, but guess what? You haven't done any of those things in the last 3.5 years. So what is your intent behind what you are saying? I think without this notion of intent, and the question obviously is, how do you enforce it? Can you enforce this intent through democracy? Can you? I can say whatever I like, but I don't have the intent. Once I get to the power, I can forget, I can put aside everything. I'm here for the next 5 years or 4 years, whatever it is. So I can put aside all those things. I have my army, I have my people, bureaucrat with me to do whatever I want to do. How do you make people stand by those intent? Right? They have an intent which is different than what they are saying. And the notion of democracy was to bring multiple people closer. That was the intent. But what we achieved instead, we achieved a fractious society instead. We have now different pockets that has very different views. They're completely alienated, they're completely separate from each other. So we have a society that is extremely fractured. See, democracy has completely failed to address one of the most foundational factors of human experience. We are different. So how do you unite people? I think there are two things that unite people. We are people, we have our own thinking, own way of thinking. And this thinking is completely different. The way I think is completely different than the thought process of everyone else. So when two completely different thinking being comes in contact, guess what happens? There is a clash. So how do you minimize this clash? How do you bring multiple thinking beings together? I think there are two ingredients in this interaction. Something higher than you, and the other notion is, of course, freedom. Something that is higher than you will always bring people closer, and that is how the society is developed with the notion of God. An ideal that you can look up to in my day-to-day life. And of course, freedom. The notion of freedom. Everyone wants to be free. Everyone wants to exercise their free will. Okay? And that free will is shaped by a particular ideal. But the problem is when this ideal is not necessarily for the good of the humanity, this ideal has selfish intent. I think the biggest failure of democracy is that it's also an ideal, but it has this selfish intent built into the system. It cannot give up the selfishness. We are talking about free speech, right? We are talking about free will. However, free will with selfish intent. Without this intent being separated or replaced by selfless intent, I think democracy is bound to fail. So democracy, it has brought equality, but guess what? At the expense of disunity. We are more fractured of a society today than it was some 5-10 years ago. So these things have happened because of the failed ideal of democracy. None of these things would have happened if the notion of equality, that is not true at all. Like, if I borrow the words of Swami Vivekananda, equality is a fanaticism. It's a fanaticism. That's what Vivekananda said. And you look at the world as it is. There is no equality in nature. Not two individuals are equal. They are different. You look differently. I look differently. So how do you unite these differences? You unite these differences with the notion of freedom. You are free. That's where the notion of polytheism comes along. Again, I don't want to get too deep into the Hinduism, that's not the point. But some of the ideals that came out of Hinduism, the notion of polytheism. In Bhagavad Gita chapter 11 verse 2-7, Krishna gives Arjuna divine vision. Right? Gives Arjuna divine vision by saying that, behold my hundreds and thousands of wonderful forms in various shapes, sizes and colors. Okay, it's talking about one God, but it manifests it in hundreds of millions of different forms, sizes, shapes and colors. This is how you unite humanity. Democracy has completely failed to grasp this idea. Completely failed. And the other question that democracy completely failed is, how do you uplift humanity? Right? Two major elements, like when I'm talking about anti-civilization, what are the elements that go against civilization? The things that go against civilization is bigotry and of course cowardice. How the political correctness was born? Because some people were cowards. They were, P word, pussy. That is the reason why political correctness was born. In the face of obstacle, in the face of difficulties, they have been told not to raise their concern. There is a saying that you see something, you say something. You see something and you are supposed to raise your concern. You are supposed to say something. But when you say something, you are being hunted down by the state. Political correctness is imposed on you. You are being gagged. Like, these are the results that came out of democracy. You got coward people, you got pussies, and of course, you got deluded, you got completely brainwashed people, bigoted people. Bigotry and cowardice, these are the two legs of democracy. What was the ideal? The ideal was free speech. The ideal was freedom and equality. Where is that freedom and equality? That has been replaced. Because equality and freedom doesn't work together. Equality and freedom doesn't work together. You can choose one, but not both. Freedom comes from inequality. I look at communism. Why communism failed? Because it gave equality to everyone. One class, the middle class, is supposed to hold all the resources of the country. And that was based on a flawed notion that everyone is equal. In reality, everyone is not equal. They have different aptitude. People have different aptitude, and based on their aptitude, they produce different things. And that's why communism miserably failed everywhere. In the last 100 years, it has been the instrument for slaughtering hundreds of millions of people. Why it failed? It failed because people have shown that they have different financial aptitude. And that's why some people are rich, some people are poor. But this is one dimension of human experience. There are art, science, culture, philosophy, language, everything. These are different dimensions of human experience. So what makes you believe that the financial dimension has failed, but everyone else will succeed? That's not going to happen. That's definitely not going to happen. So you have to give up either of these ideals. Either you give up your freedom or you give up the ideal of equality. Democracy. These two ideals cannot be practiced together. So I think this is what fundamentally democracy, like people who are talking about democracy, they totally fail to grasp these ideals. The consequences, the results that are coming out of democracy, they totally failed to understand what the underlying issue is. So when you are talking about democracy, democracy has failed to provide brave humanity. It has failed to produce humanity that is richer in terms of its intellectual development. And to counter these two effects, Hinduism has provided Raja Yoga as science to uplift humanity. What is the science to uplift humanity? Technology is not the science to uplift humanity. Again, some people have higher aptitude, and that's why some people become scientists, but that's only one area. Not everyone is a scientist. But how do you uplift humanity? Some people are scientists and some people are psychopaths. So how do you uplift humanity so that the psychopath can also become scientist? That question has not been resolved by democracy and will never be resolved by democracy, because democracy assumes that those two individuals are equal. It does not take into consideration of the inequality that these two individuals demonstrate. So the question is, how do you raise this equality? Like, how do you raise this humanity? How do you uplift two human beings? The answer is Raja Yoga. Raja Yoga is the notion how you uplift humanity. And in Bhagavad Gita, in chapter 2, Krishna, again, chapter 11, verse 2 to 7, Krishna gives Arjuna divine vision, right? He's saying that you are deluded. In chapter 2, Krishna is saying to Arjuna that you are a coward. You have to shed this weakness. He's urging Arjuna to shed his weakness, his mental weakness, that even if you are, what was the context of Bhagavad Gita? Like, what was the context of the war of Kurukshetra? The war of Kurukshetra, the context was the war between two clans, might and the right. These are two clans these are the families of belonging to the same house. Kauravas and the Pandavas. The Kauravas has the right and the Pandavas had the might. So it was a war between might and right. So Krishna's message was, even if you are small in numbers, even if you are weak, you have to take up the arms and fight to destroy the evil. You have to shed your mental weakness. Democracy completely failed in all of these areas. Human psychology is like a puzzle. It has different secluded places, recess. Those recesses contain mysteries, and those puzzles have never ever been resolved by this democracy. Never ever. So again, my point is that democracy once and for all, for the sake of freedom, it has to go. Dharma has to be uplifted. Freedom and democracy does not go hand in hand. So I think democracy is going to face a lot of challenges in the coming days. What I understood so far is that, look, plagiarism is not civilization. Some of the ideas the idea of equality and all those things, these ideas actually originated in Bharat, in India. And when the Greeks, they tried to implement those ideas, first of all, they didn't understand the whole context, and then they tried to impose their own version of the actual issue. They have very poor understanding of the human psychology. At least that's my take on this entire democracy thing, entire secularism thing. They didn't understand human psychology, and they tried to concoct, they tried to make something out of those notions. And right now, we are faced with pretty much like a fractured society that probably gonna lead to a very difficult situation in coming months, if not in coming days. So I think it is time to be open about democracy. So this is my take on democracy. So let me know what you think. And I hope you enjoyed. If that is the case, give it a like, spread the message, share it, and I'm definitely looking forward to joining you on the very next one. Bye for now.